The picnic basket was still smoking when I got there. Half-melted Tupperware, trampled potato salad, someone's flip-flop half buried in the dirt. Karen was screaming something about liability, while a grown man in cargo shorts climbed a tree to escape, and in the middle of it all, lumbering through the haze with the calm confidence of a mall cop in a riot, was a 600-pound grizzly named Muffin. Yep, that's me standing by the lake holding a tranquilizer gun and wearing a bathrobe. You're probably wondering how we got here. It's funny how a place can get stitched into your bones. I didn't choose this land, it chose me, or more accurately, my Uncle Earl did. Most folks in this part of the state knew him as the bearded hermit with a shotgun and a doctorate in ecology. Depending on the day, to me, he was the man who taught me how to track raccoons by flashlight and speak softly to bears like you were negotiating a ceasefire. When he passed, he didn't leave behind much in the way of material things: no savings account, no will written in lawyer speak, just a crumpled envelope with my name on it, the deed to 78 acres of lakeside heaven, and a note scribbled in the margin that read, "Keep them wild, keep them fed, and keep the cars out." So that's what I did. Uncle Earl wasn't just eccentric, he was methodical. Years before he died, he worked with the State Conservation Office to get the land zoned as agricultural conservation habitat. That meant no developments, no lake view bungalows, and no one stepping foot on our soil without very specific permits. And tucked behind a ridge on the western stretch of the lake was his pride and joy, a reinforced open-air containment facility with elevated walkways, native brush fencing, and a security gate strong enough to stop a four-wheeler. Inside lived two non-releasable grizzlies, one named Junebug, who'd since passed, and the other a cinnamon-coated 600-pound tank of a bear named Muffin. Don't ask me how she got that name, probably some dark joke from Earl, but Muffin was special, rescued from a roadside circus as a cub, and blind in one eye. She'd spent most of her life with Uncle Earl, and now me, under federal wildlife permit 543A. NCWR 3. Muffin was classified as an educational specimen and permanently protected. Translation: she lived here legally for life, and she was my roommate. More or less, I took care of the fencing, her diet routine, veterinary checks, and the mountain of paperwork that came with hosting a federally tagged apex predator. The state visited quarterly, the federal guys once a year. I kept my end tight, you had to, with bears, and I'd grown into the work like it was a second skin, peaceful, steady, wild in all the right ways. That is, until the HOA got involved. I'd known about them, sure, their little development popped up a few years back on the far side of the lake, cookie-cutter homes with names like the Cedars and the Estates at Maple Shoals. Real estate agents love to advertise serene lakeside living and access to natural trails, even though those trails were mine, and access was something they never had. At first, it was harmless. Some of the kids would fish along the water near their edge. Sometimes couples would paddle out too far on kayaks and spook a heron. I didn't mind, so long as they didn't cross the signs, you know, the kind: private property, no trespassing, wildlife habitat, and the big one hand carved by Earl himself, danger, live animal zone. But then came the letters, neatly typed, signed by a certain Karen Delaney Whitmore, president of the Lakeshore HOA. The first one was simple, a friendly request to discuss the potential for shared use of lakefront amenities for HOA residing families. I ignored it. The second was less friendly, suggestions that my exclusive use of the lake might be in violation of state water access guidelines, which was pure bull because the lake sat 100% within my property lines, as confirmed by 3 different county survey maps and a hand-drawn topo. Earl left me with annotations like "Otter Den here" and "Deadbuck Sinkhole. Do not step." I replied with a certified letter complete with my zoning documentation, easement boundaries, and a photocopy of the federal wildlife license. I also included a sticky note that read, "This ain't a golf course, Karen, bears live here." For a while that shut her up, but then I started noticing things, little things: a tree near the southern fence line cut suspiciously close to the ground, sap still bleeding, orange plastic trail markers nailed to trunks that weren't mine. Someone had taken a weed whacker to a 20-yard stretch of brush near the eastern dock, the exact spot where turtles nested every spring. And then one morning I found the boldest move yet, a laminated sign planted right near my fence: future site of HOA trail extension, enjoy nature responsibly. I damn near choked on my coffee. I ripped it out of the ground and drove straight to the HOA clubhouse, where Karen and her bobble-headed board of retirees were hosting a pancakes and planning brunch. I showed them the sign and the boundary map and said in a voice that carried through folding chairs and lukewarm syrup, "You touch one more inch of my soil, and I'll feed your surveyor to Muffin." That should have been the end of it, but Karen smiled tight, practiced, insufferably smug, and said, "You know, I talked to a friend who's a property attorney, and he says you can't actually own a natural lake, that the water is public domain." I blinked. "Karen," I said slowly, "I don't own the water, I own the land under it, around it. And the only legal access to it. This ain't a public beach, it's a bear sanctuary." She waved her hand like I was some charming backwoods uncle. "Maybe we'll let the courts decide. Until then, you might want to tidy up your signage. It's not very neighborly." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding, this was war. So I got to work, installed new cameras, solar-powered, infrared motion-triggered, doubled the fencing on the western side, adding a third gate with a combination lock. I changed weekly, posted new signage every 50 yards this time, with legal citations and laminated wildlife statutes. For good measure, sent copies to the county, sent copies to the feds, fed Muffin extra salmon. She liked it smoked. I logged every incident, every intrusion, every trail flag I pulled out of a tree and stuffed into a manila folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits 1, even dug out Uncle Earl's old typewriter and clacked out a reminder letter to the HOA. Accessing this land without permission is not just trespassing, it's a federal wildlife offense. Muffin doesn't discriminate, neither does the law. For weeks it went quiet, but you can always tell when something's brewing in suburbia. The air gets thick, sprinklers start running longer than usual, lawns get trimmed a little too neatly, and emails come in batches instead of singles. Karen had something cooking. I just didn't know yet that it involved tiki torches, folding chairs, and a picnic table 6 feet from Muffin's enclosure. But we'll get there. First, I had to watch the HOA try to turn my lake into their next neighborhood attraction, and I had to let them get just close enough to hang themselves with their own garland bunting. Because the great thing about managing bears is if you do it right, you learn exactly when not to intervene. You let the fools approach, and you let Muffin do what she does best, remind people that nature doesn't ask for permission. They didn't even bother to send me an invitation. Not that I would have gone, but you'd think basic decency would warrant a courtesy flyer. Instead, I heard about the spring renewal picnic from the back of a flyer stapled to a telephone pole half a mile down the county road, flapping in the wind like some clueless declaration of war. Join us for fun in the sun, music, games, food trucks, and family bonding at the natural lakeside meadow Saturday at noon. Because as far as I knew, there was only one natural lakeside meadow in this zip code, and I owned every damn inch of it. I crumpled the flyer, tossed it in the bed of my truck, and made a slow U-turn toward the property line, and there it was, 2 bright pink surveyor stakes jammed into the mossy earth about 15 feet past my fence line, twine stretched taut between them like someone was planning to build a playground in a war zone. My stomach dropped. There were more up ahead, one near the alder grove, another smack in the middle of the hill sloping down to Muffin's enclosure, and at least a dozen little flags staked in a grid like they were planning to install lawn darts or a cursed HOA Stonehenge. I walked the line in silence, camera in hand, snapping photos of every intrusion, timestamped, geotagged, and legally documented. This wasn't just trespass. This was escalation. I called the sheriff's office first, Deputy Mills, who'd been out here before when a couple teens snuck past the signs to try and take selfies with Muffin. He answered with a groggy voice and a promise to send someone by Monday. Then I called the zoning office and finally the state wildlife department, who at least understood the gravity of the situation. If that bear is startled into public view, the officer said flatly, it becomes a liability nightmare, not for you, mind, but for anyone dumb enough to put themselves between a grizzly and an exit. I gave him the exact coordinates he promised to flag it. I flagged it too with a 10-foot vinyl banner that read, "You are now entering a federally permitted live bear habitat. Turn back or leave limbless." And just to drive the point home, I strung it right across the old trail they'd been pretending didn't have a gate. But Saturday came anyway. The sun was too cheerful, the birds too noisy. Around 10:30 a.m. I heard the hum of an electric leaf blower. By 11, the sharp click of tent poles, the crinkling of folding chairs, and the unmistakable thump of a Bluetooth speaker being tested with some god-awful remix of Walking on Sunshine. I stepped out onto the back porch with a mug of coffee and took in the scene like a general surveying enemy troop movement. Karen's husband, Bob, was already sweating through his salmon-colored polo shirt, arguing with a teenager about how to secure the bounce house without stakes. Diane, another HOA board member and self-declared community vibe curator, was setting out collapsible tables covered in sunflower print plastic cloth. Someone dragged a smoker grill over the boundary line, and they're strutting like a commander across the freshly trampled moss was Karen herself, clipboard in one hand, laminated schedule in the other, barking orders like she was hosting a NATO summit instead of a mid-tier HOA get-together they'd set up on my land, fully not a foot on their side. They'd crossed into the conservation zone built around the creek mouth and were now happily installing a crafts tent, not 20 FT from Muffin's enclosure, though they probably thought it was just some scenic wooden fence. I didn't call the cops, I didn't shout, I didn't even approach. I just started the cameras, checked the batteries on my tranquilizer rifle, and made sure Muffin had her raw salmon brunch an hour early, so she'd be too full to get curious about the smell of grilled hot dogs. I waited. They made it about 90 minutes. The picnic was in full swing, if you can call adults trying to play cornhole, while holding rose and novelty tumblers. Swinging children screamed in the bounce house. Bluetooth speakers blasted a mix of early 2000s pop that made my ears bleed. From the porch, Karen stood on a makeshift platform, welcoming guests to this untouched corner of our beautiful lakeside community, and I swear I heard her say the word nature at least 12 times. It was the word untouched that really got me, because they touched everything. They trampled wild onion, flattened turtle nests, and hung fairy lights in trees that were older than our country's tax code. They'd turned my field into a suburban mall parking lot with slightly better acoustics. And then inevitably it happened. A child, maybe 10, maybe 12, threw a frisbee too hard. It arced into the woods like a warning shot from a cartoon, spinning out of sight past the enclosure gate. I watched him chase it. I even knew his name, Brandon. Sweet kid, probably didn't know better. I had just enough time to put down my coffee and grab the tranquilizer gun before the screaming started. It was the sharp, piercing kind of scream you don't forget. Not horror exactly, not pain, just raw panic. Brandon came running back with his mouth wide open, waving his arms like he was trying to swat at invisible hornets. "There's a bear," he shrieked. And I'll give him credit, he didn't embellish. The field erupted like a firecracker. Parents shouted, folding chairs flew, someone knocked over the grill, a wine bottle shattered near the crafts tent, and 3 moms dove behind the bounce house like it was Normandy. Karen didn't run, though. No, she marched right up to the enclosure gate, waving her clipboard like it was a holy relic, shouting, "Who is responsible for this?" As if she'd stumbled into a rogue zoo exhibit instead of a federally managed wildlife sanctuary. She was explicitly told not to enter. I stepped out of the trees in my robe and boots, rifle slung over my shoulder, and watched her expression change from outrage to confusion to a kind of shriveled horror, like she just realized the decorative bear fence had a name and a permit number and a handler. She hissed, "You brought that thing here, you planted it." I didn't respond. I was too busy scanning the tree and counting guests, watching Muffin sniff the breeze from behind the tree, and placid as ever, her belly full, her mood lazy. I raised a hand to calm the group. "Nobody move, nobody shout. She's not aggressive, she's curious. I'm here to get her back into the enclosure. Call animal control, you're liable." Someone was already dialing 911. I stepped forward, calm as ever, leveled the tranquilizer gun just enough to show I meant business, and radioed the wildlife officer. "Muffin is out, low alert, guests on site. I'm administering sedation." I fired once, clean, painless dart straight into her flank. Muffin grunted, swayed, and sat down like a tired uncle. 10 minutes later, she was asleep. 20 minutes after that, the state officer arrived, clipboard in hand, nodding as I explained everything. The whole incident was logged, managed, and signed off without incident. Nobody hurt, nobody mauled. 1 bear, 1 dart, and a dozen shaken suburbanites. As they loaded Muffin back into the enclosure, Karen stood off to the side, mascara streaking, wine stain on her blouse, watching her grand picnic unravel like a cursed dream. "You did this," she whispered. "You orchestrated it." I turned to her, removed my sunglasses, and said, "Karen, you threw a party on a bear preserve. What did you think was going to happen?" It only took Karen 72 hours after the picnic incident to file the first official salvo. I got the notice in a manila envelope taped to my gate, sealed with one of those faux gold HOA emblems that makes it feel like someone thinks their suburban bylaws outrank the U.S. Constitution. The cover letter was addressed to me by full name, no less, with the subject line, "Civil nuisance complaint, deliberate threat to public safety." According to Karen's board, Muffin wasn't a rescue animal protected under a federal wildlife permit. No, she was now classified as an unpredictable apex predator maintained for the purpose of intimidation. The complaint cited witness testimonies, all from HOA board members, multiple child endangerment scenarios, aka Brandon's frisbee toss, and included 3 blurry photos, one of Muffin sniffing the air, one of me holding a tranquilizer rifle like a breakfast beer, and one of the bounce house mid-deflation, which I'm fairly certain had nothing to do with the bear and everything to do with Bob forgetting to anchor the damn thing. Still, it was real. Filed with the county civil nuisance suit HOA versus me. I'd seen this playbook before, not in bear sanctuary disputes, sure, but the tactics were familiar. Weaponize fear, invent a legal pretext, and push the narrative until people start repeating it like gospel. Karen didn't care about the truth. She cared about leverage, and she had just declared war. Fortunately for me, I was already armed to the teeth with facts. Within 24 hours, I sent a counter packet to the county clerk, state wildlife division, and local magistrate. It included my conservation easement agreement, updated habitat surveys, 3 active permits from the State Department of Environmental Resources, 1 federal wildlife registration under Code 543, a NCWR 3, and letters of partnership from both the University Biology Department and a local conservation nonprofit. I printed everything on heavy stock paper and clipped it all with a brass fastener just so Karen's lawyer could feel the weight of his mistake. I also included security cam footage from the day of the picnic, timestamped and annotated, showing exactly where the HOA had entered my land without permission, set up unauthorized structures, and ignored signage that included words like danger and wildlife zone in 3 languages. By all accounts, I should have been the one suing them. But while I worked on the legal front, Karen got busy with the propaganda. Flyers started appearing around the HOA's neighborhoods. The title, "Is there a bear in your backyard?" The bullet points were pure gold: unregulated predatory wildlife, illegal exotic animal enclosures, potential rabies risk, non-domesticated threat, and my personal favorite, man with gun and bathrobe, not properly credentialed for tranquilizer use. She was trying to paint me as some backwoods lunatic running a backyard zoo with a sedated grizzly on a leash and an attitude problem. And for a few days it worked. A couple of the more dramatic HOA members posted on the neighborhood Facebook group warning parents to keep your children away from the woods. One claimed their golden retriever had refused to eat for 2 days after hearing Muffin snore. Another said they spotted multiple bears at once, despite the fact that I've never housed more than 1 grizzly since Earl died. And Muffin's the size of a golf cart, hard to mistake for a family of anything. Then Karen crossed the line. One morning, I woke up to an unholy screech outside. I thought it was a hawk at first, or maybe a dying possum. Nope. Karen had installed what she called a solar-powered ultrasonic motion deterrent system along the shared tree line. It was meant to protect families from invasive predators, but in practice, it was a motion-activated siren that let out a high-pitched alien meets wailing banshee shriek anytime something as small as a squirrel moved. It startled the deer, drove off the foxes, and completely wrecked the nesting cycle of a great blue heron pair I'd been monitoring for 6 years. Worse, it went off at all hours: wind siren, rain siren, shadow from a passing cloud siren. It was like living next to a horror movie alarm clock. The county noise complaints stacked up quickly, but that didn't stop Karen. She just doubled down, adding reflective predator tape to the fence and claiming it was an experimental bear avoidance visual barrier she'd read about in a parenting blog. It was like she was fighting off wildlife ghosts from a Pinterest thread. That's when I decided to go public. I called up a state biologist I'd worked with before, Dr. Mara Chan, sharp, compassionate, and absolutely allergic to. I invited her out to the property for a walkthrough. She brought 2 graduate students and a drone. Then I invited someone else, Miles Bentley, an independent environmental journalist with a penchant for messy land use disputes and a YouTube channel that got more traffic than Karen's wine parties combined. I gave them both the Grand Tour camera ready, the lake, the fencing, the permits, the signage. Muffin even made a brief, perfectly timed appearance, lumbering out of the brush like a furry ambassador, sniffing the air, then plopping down in the sun like she was posing for National Geographic. The article dropped the following Tuesday. The bear next door: what happens when suburbia clashes with conservation. It went viral within 48 hours. It was picked up by a local NPR affiliate, a wildlife blog, with 500,000 readers, and even got a retweet from that famous wildlife vet with the podcast. People loved it. Muffin became a symbol there. Were memes, fan art, a gift of her rolling in a patch of ferns got more likes than the mayor's re-election video. Someone launched a GoFundMe to support Muffin's forest freedom, and it raised $120 in 2 days, enough to build a proper wildlife observation deck on the edge of the lake. Even the sheriff's office dropped their poker face when I came in to renew my tranquilizer tags. That your bear on the internet? The clerk asked. My kid wants a stuffed version. But while the public rallied behind Muffin, Karen was busy getting desperate public sympathy. Had Backfired HOA members were emailing her board asking why they were wasting dues on legal fees and why their neighborhood was now the one that tried to evict a bear, so she launched her boldest move yet eminent domain. I got the notice 2 weeks later, an official-looking petition filed with the County Planning Commission requesting the reassignment of underutilized private land for essential community recreation and safety use. The justification: wildlife presence and lack of formal land development. Attached were 37 digital signatures from residents of the HOA, except that 3 were dead, 5 had moved out years ago in Bro, and at least a dozen were repeats under slightly altered names. She even signed one KW and another Karen D. Whitmore, like that would count as 2 different people. It was blatant fraud. I didn't waste time. I handed the whole mess to the state attorney's office and the Department of Natural Resources. 2 weeks later, they launched a formal investigation into petition tampering and HOA abuse of zoning ordinances. Karen tried to claim she'd been misled by a third-party contractor. Her vice president resigned. Always understand your land ownership and usage rights clearly. You might not always know the real boundaries between your land and others. Read all documents and maps carefully, and never let anyone trespass without permission. Stand firm when protecting what you love, whether it's a giant bear or a peaceful piece of land. Don't let anyone push you out or destroy what matters to you. Be ready for legal battles and public disputes. This isn't just personal. It involves laws, regulations, and the community. Collect evidence, consult experts, and speak up to defend yourself. Never underestimate the power of media and community support. When your story is told the right way, it can build empathy and support strong enough to make troublemakers think twice. Stay patient and calm in a crisis. When faced with provocation or conflict, keeping calm and handling things professionally will help you win in the long run. Respect nature and the living creatures around us. Nature isn't something to dominate or turn into a playground. Protect the habitats of wildlife with care and respect.